She was bleeding into the dust, but she still stood guard. I saw her from the fence line, white as bone, trembling on 3 legs, her chest soaked in red. She was shielding a tiny white German Shepherd puppy, barely old enough to stand. His ears perked, his eyes locked on mine. They were in an open pasture on the outskirts of San Antonio, Texas, midday sun above, yellow grass below, and a single brown horse grazing in the distance, glancing over like it had seen this scene before. The mama dog's paw was twisted unnaturally, probably broken. Her coat was knotted, filthy, and matted with blood. But she didn't flinch when I approached. She didn't run, she just lowered her head and placed her body between me and the puppy. The puppy, God, he was so clean. His fur was untouched like he'd somehow been spared. He had a teal collar, way too big for his neck, and a tiny silver tag that caught the sunlight. He didn't bark. He didn't whimper. He just stood there behind her, trusting. I froze about 10 feet away. I didn't want to provoke her, but I could see it already, her ribs, her eyes, the dried mud along her side. Someone had dumped them. That much was clear, but what got me wasn't the cruelty. It was her. She was dying, and still she wasn't letting anyone near her baby. My name's David C. Lawson. I'm 47. I volunteer with a local search and rescue group when I can. Mostly dogs, sometimes wildlife. I've seen dogs left behind, dogs broken, but this was something else. This was a mother still fighting when her body had nothing left. I looked at the puppy again. He took one small step toward me and sat down. Just like that, as if he'd already made a decision. And that's when I realized I wasn't just looking at a rescue. I was looking at a bond that hadn't broken, even after everything. She wouldn't let me come closer. Not yet. But the puppy had already chosen. I crouched slowly, keeping my hands low and open, trying not to let the heat shimmer off the dirt mess with my focus. The puppy watched me, curious but calm, while his mother pressed her body tighter to the ground, ears back, lips curled just enough to warn me. She didn't bark, she didn't growl. She just looked, like she'd already seen the worst and didn't expect anything better to come from me. Her leg was worse than I'd thought. The paw bent under at an unnatural angle, swollen and cracked. Dried blood crusted her shoulder, and I could see a raw ring around her neck. Chain damage. Deep. She'd been tethered hard and for too long, but none of it seemed to matter to her as much as that tiny German Shepherd puppy behind her. I moved inches closer and pulled a bottle of water from my bag. I unscrewed the cap, poured a little into the plastic lid, and placed it on the dirt, gently sliding it forward with the tips of my fingers. The puppy blinked, tilted his head, and then he moved. Not fast, not scared, just steady like he'd done this before. He walked out from under his mother's chest and stepped straight toward the water. She didn't stop him. Her eyes followed him, but she stayed down. Her breath was quick, shallow. Her body trembled with every rise of her ribs. The puppy drank eagerly, lapping it all up in seconds. He looked up at me again, and I swear I felt something settle between us. Not a connection. Not yet. But an understanding, like he knew I wasn't there to take anything from him. That's when I noticed something else. There were small drag marks in the dirt, from the fence line, tiny, uneven lines leading to where they now lay. The puppy hadn't wandered here. She had brought him, dragged herself across open field and gravel, injured, alone, with nothing left but him. She brought him here to die, maybe, but more likely, she brought him here hoping someone would see. Someone like me. I reached for my phone, hands still trembling. I called the shelter I work with, San Antonio County Companion Rescue. I told them I needed backup, medical, transport, whatever they could send. Then I sat down slowly and kept talking, not to the dispatcher, to her. "I'm not here to hurt him," I said. "Or you. You did your job. Let me do mine now." She didn't move, but she didn't stop him when he curled up in my lap. His fur was warm against my thighs, soft like fleece, with that faint puppy smell, milk, dust, and something heartbreakingly innocent. He nestled in without hesitation, let out a tiny breath, and closed his eyes. Just like that. As if he'd finally found where he was supposed to be. His mother watched every second. She didn't growl, didn't lunge, but her eyes burned through me like twin suns. I didn't move a muscle. I let him stay there, curled against my jeans, while I kept my voice low and steady, telling her everything she needed to hear, even if she couldn't understand the words. "You kept him safe," I murmured. "You didn't fail. You did the impossible." I wanted so badly to reach for her, to check that leg, to see how deep the wounds really went. But something in me said not yet, that if I crossed that invisible line too soon, she'd bolt, or worse, she'd fight. And in her condition, fighting would mean bleeding out in the dirt. She shifted slightly, enough to adjust her weight off her paw. That small movement sent another splash of blood down her front leg. The dust soaked it up instantly, red on white. I'll never forget that image. I glanced toward the road. Still no sign of the rescue van. The field around us was deathly still, except for the occasional clink of the horse's reins in the distance. Time felt thick. I reached into my bag again and pulled out a strip of beef jerky. Broke it, placed a piece gently on the ground between us, then slid it just a few inches closer to her, pausing every second like it might explode. She didn't take it, but she didn't turn away either. The puppy stirred in my lap, lifted his head, and gave a soft yip, high-pitched, barely audible. Her ears perked, and then she moved. One step. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't even safe. She stumbled forward, collapsing just shy of the jerky, and pulled herself closer with her elbows. Her injured leg dragged uselessly behind her. Her breath came in ragged bursts, but she didn't break eye contact. Not with me. Not for a second. She reached the treat, sniffed it, and left it untouched. Instead, she placed her muzzle gently on her puppy's back, then looked up at me, like she was saying, "You hold him now, but he's still mine." And in that moment, I knew we had a chance. I didn't reach for her. I didn't dare. She was close now, close enough that I could see the old scars beneath the fresh ones, lines etched into her skin like someone had used her up and tossed her when the prophet ran dry. Her body told a story no dog should ever live. Scars on her belly from overbreeding, chain burns on her neck, calluses where bone pressed too long against concrete. But somehow, despite all of it, she had carried this German Shepherd puppy across open land, protected him, kept him warm and fed. And now she dragged herself to my feet. Not for help, for permission. She laid her head down beside him, eyes half-lidded, breath thin. He licked her nose once. She didn't move after that. I pulled off my flannel and laid it out on the dirt, lifted the puppy and placed him in the center, gently wrapping the corners to cradle him like a hammock. He whined softly at first, but didn't fight it. Then I looked at her, and for the first time, I saw it. She wasn't guarding him anymore. She was letting go, not because she wanted to, because she had to. I shifted to my knees, slow and deliberate, and reached out. My hand hovered just above her side, waiting for that flick of the ear, that flash of teeth. It didn't come. She let me touch her, and the second my hand rested on her ribs, her entire body shuddered like it had just remembered what kindness felt like. I kept talking to her. Soft, simple words. "You made it," I whispered. "He's safe now. You don't have to fight anymore." Behind me, I finally heard the crunch of tires on gravel. The rescue team. 2 techs in green shirts came jogging toward us with gear and carriers. I raised a hand to slow them. No sudden movements. I told them to bring a stretcher, not a crate. She wasn't going into a box. Not after what she'd survived. She deserved better. The techs nodded and moved fast but quiet, unfolding a canvas stretcher and laying it out near her side. I slid my arms underneath her, carefully, like lifting something fragile and sacred, and she didn't resist. She didn't have the strength. As we placed her on the stretcher, the puppy let out a sharp bark, like a protest, like he didn't want her out of sight. I handed him to one of the techs, wrapped in my flannel, and walked beside both of them as we headed for the van. The sun was still beating down, the pasture wide and empty. But I swear, when I looked down at her on that stretcher, barely clinging to consciousness, and then at the puppy blinking up at me from the flannel, I knew they weren't just survivors. They were a story. And it wasn't over yet. The inside of the rescue van smelled like antiseptic and fear. She lay on the padded stretcher, her head resting sideways, one eye half open, tracking every move I made. The puppy, still wrapped in my flannel, sat in a carrier just beside her. He didn't cry, didn't bark, just kept pressing his nose against the plastic door, watching her. The tech beside me, Alicia, had seen worse. We all had. But even she kept her voice low when she read out the notes. Female, approximately 4 to 5 years. Severe dehydration, multiple lacerations, right forelimb possibly fractured, cervical trauma, evidence of breeding, no chip. I didn't need a chip to know who she was. She was his world. Traffic out of the field was slow. Country roads, cattle gates, a detour that added 30 minutes. Every bump made her wince, her paw twitching involuntarily. I reached out and gently pressed my hand to her side again, grounding her, not restraining, just letting her know she wasn't alone. The puppy curled tighter, eyes fluttering. Even asleep, he stayed facing her. We pulled into the San Antonio Companion Rescue medical intake around 1:30 p.m. The emergency team was already waiting. Clipboards, gloves, soft voices. I carried the puppy inside myself. No way was I handing him off to anyone just yet. They took her to the back instantly. One of the techs tried to ask me about intake forms, but I was already halfway down the corridor, flannel bundle in arms. The moment they wheeled her through the double doors, the puppy yelped. Loud, sharp. It echoed off the tile walls like glass cracking. He squirmed in my arms, tiny paws kicking, head whipping toward the sound of the doors closing behind her. That cry shattered something in me. A vet tech named Mel saw it happen. She gently touched my shoulder and whispered, "He'll need sedation if she doesn't come back." I just nodded. What else could I do? I took him into the quiet room, small space, couch, low lighting, and sat down with him still in my arms. His breathing was fast now, shallow, his body hot from the stress. I loosened the flannel, pressed his chest to mine, and waited. 10 minutes. 20. No updates. 35 minutes later, the vet walked in. She had gloves off, arms crossed, face tight with the kind of expression that always comes before bad news. "Stable," she said. "For now. But it's not good. Broken paw, severe anemia, internal bruising. We're flushing her system, hydrating, stabilizing vitals." But she hesitated. She's shutting down. She held it together out there long enough to get him here, but now her body's collapsing. If she doesn't turn a corner in the next 24 hours... She didn't finish the sentence. I looked down at the puppy. He was awake again, and he was staring straight at the door she'd gone through. He refused to eat. I tried 3 different brands of soft food, warm chicken broth, even tiny bits of boiled egg from the staff fridge. Nothing worked. He sniffed it all, then backed away, eyes fixed on the closed treatment room door, like it was the only thing holding him together. By nightfall, the rescue center had dimmed its lights. Most of the staff had gone home. The waiting room silent, except for the low hum of the fridge and the occasional rustle of paper. I stayed in the recovery suite with him, sitting cross-legged on the floor with his flannel beside me, the same one that still smelled like sun and dust and the place where we'd found her. I named him Ghost. It just came to me. Maybe because of his pale fur, or the way he moved like a whisper, or how quiet he'd become. Or maybe because he was haunting her absence in a way only a puppy could. Ghost didn't cry. He didn't whimper. He just watched the door. At around 10 p.m., a nurse let me peek in through the observation window. She was still there, on oxygen, an IV in her front leg, her body wrapped in clean bandages. They'd removed the matted fur, flushed the wounds. Her breathing was shallow but rhythmic. The paw was worse than we'd hoped, fractured in 2 places, possible nerve damage. She wasn't sedated, but she wasn't moving either. They said she stirred when she heard barking earlier in the day. But now, nothing. I sat back down with Ghost and whispered what I wasn't even sure he could understand. "She's still fighting." He blinked slowly, then turned away. That hit harder than any noise. It was like watching something inside him dim, like a tiny switch that had been flickering all day finally went dark. I saw it in the way his shoulders dropped, in the way he laid down and rested his head on my boot, as if he didn't have the strength to hope anymore. That's when I knew this wasn't just about physical survival anymore. This was grief. And Ghost, this tiny German Shepherd puppy, was already mourning a mother who hadn't died yet. I leaned back against the wall, my arm around him, and let the silence wrap around us. The flannel, now his blanket, rose and fell with every small breath he took. I kept thinking, she held herself together long enough to get him here. But will he hold on long enough to see her again? Tomorrow would decide everything. Morning came too quietly. The fluorescent lights in the hallway flickered on one by one, and the world outside the recovery room shifted from black to pale gold. But inside, everything felt suspended, like time itself was waiting to see what would happen. Ghost hadn't moved all night. He'd slept curled against my side, breathing shallow and quick, occasionally twitching in his dreams. Every time I shifted, his ears perked, Perez, only to droop again when he realized the door was still closed. At 6:12 a.m., it opened. Mel, the tech from yesterday, stepped in without a word. Her eyes were red, like she hadn't slept either. She didn't say anything at first, just knelt down in front of me and gently brushed a hand along Ghost's back. "She made it through the night," she whispered. I felt the breath I'd been holding for hours finally release. Ghost lifted his head. His ears stood. His whole little body vibrated, not with joy, not yet, but with the first trace of something close to it. Awareness. Recognition. "She's awake?" I asked. Mel nodded. "Weak, but responsive. Her vitals are holding. We think she heard him crying last night. That might have kept her here." I looked down at Ghost. He looked back at me. And then he stood. Wobbly at first, then firmer, those little white paws patting across the tile toward the door like he knew exactly where to go. I rose to follow, but Mel stopped me with a gentle hand. "Let him try first," she said. They opened the treatment room slowly, carefully. The vet was inside, adjusting the oxygen mask, double-checking the IV line. Ghost walked past it all, straight to the metal-legged table where his mother lay. And he cried. Not loud, not desperate, just a soft, aching whine that cut through every machine beep in the room. Her ear flicked, her paw shifted. Then slowly, so slowly it barely looked real, her eyes opened and she turned her head toward the sound. She saw him. And the second she did, her body tried to rise. She failed, of course. She was too weak. But she tried. Ghost was already up on his back legs, front paws scraping the edge of the table, tail wagging wildly. I stepped in then, scooped him up, and gently laid him beside her. He curled into her chest the way he must have done since birth, and she wrapped her neck around him like a frayed blanket. No words were spoken, none needed. In that moment, there was no rescue team, no pain, no broken paw, no abandoned pasture, just a mother and her puppy, still together, still whole, still here. That afternoon, I sat on the clinic floor again, but this time the air didn't feel so heavy. She was off oxygen now. Weak, yes, but alert. Her eyes tracked every move Ghost made as he darted clumsily around the recovery pen they'd placed beside her table. They were keeping her in isolation for now, mostly to limit stress, but they let me and Ghost stay. We were the only things that made her heart rate stabilize. She still couldn't stand. The leg was a mess, swollen, splinted, and stitched, but the internal bleeding had stopped and her vitals were climbing. The vet said it was a miracle. I didn't think it was. I thought it was her. She had dragged herself across that field not for survival, but for him. Everything about her screamed a body that had given up, except the part that kept protecting, the part that still watched him now, not blinking, even as she rested her head on the edge of the blanket. Ghost had started eating again. He'd wolfed down a cup of wet food that morning, and now he was chewing on a rubber toy shaped like a chicken, tail swishing side to side with a rhythm I hadn't seen before. It was the first moment I truly saw him act like a puppy. I asked the vet if we could give her a name. "She deserves one," I said. They looked at her chart, labeled with nothing but a code number and the word intake female. After a moment of silence, I said it out loud. "Call her Halo." Because that's what she was. A battered, bloodied, limping angel who hadn't let the world take her purpose from her. Not even when her body was failing. When I said it, her ears twitched. I leaned down beside her and said it again, softer. "Halo." Her eyes moved. She didn't react beyond that, but it was enough. Ghost came over, flopped down against her side, and let out a long, happy sigh. She curled her neck around him the way she had that first moment in the field. Still guarding, still giving everything. One of the younger volunteers came in later and gasped when she saw them curled like that. She didn't say it out loud, but I could see it on her face. They didn't look like rescue dogs. They looked like a painting, soft white fur tangled together, one heart between two bodies. We kept the lights low the rest of the day. No more poking, no tests, just rest, just quiet, just healing. And even though the clinic around us buzzed with noise, phones, voices, distant barking, I heard it for the first time. Silence inside myself. Like some part of me that had been wound too tight had finally loosened. Because whatever Halo had gone through, she didn't pass it on. She ended the cycle, protected the next life, gave him a chance to grow up untouched by the things that scarred her. And in doing that, she'd saved more than her son. She reminded me that there are still stories in this world worth staying up all night to witness. The first time she stood, everyone stopped what they were doing. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't even steady. But when Halo planted her good paw beneath her and pushed, we all held our breath. Ghost froze mid-step, toy dangling from his mouth, eyes wide as if he couldn't believe it either. She trembled, she swayed, but she stood. 4 days had passed since we brought them in. 4 days of IVs, anti-inflammatories, quiet mornings, whispered encouragements, and Ghost refusing to leave her side. I think it was him who kept her moving, even when she was barely holding on. Every time he yawned or rolled over or nudged her with his nose, something in her shifted too. She stood for exactly 6 seconds before her leg gave out and she collapsed gently onto the padded mat. But it was enough. Ghost bounded toward her with a squeak, tail wagging like a flag, and licked her muzzle with frantic joy. And for the first time, we saw it. Her tongue flicked out once, returning the gesture. The room erupted, texts clapped. Someone cried. I did my best to pretend it wasn't me. Recovery isn't a straight line. We knew that. She still had pain, still needed another surgery for the paw once the swelling went down. But this was the turning point. The moment her body caught up to her spirit, she was choosing life now. By the end of the week, Halo could limp 10 feet with assistance. Ghost walked beside her every step, his tiny frame barely the size of her head. It became a ritual, the slow, daily march from the recovery pen to the patch of sun by the back door. She'd collapse into the warmth, and he'd curl into the crook of her belly. That little spot of light became their sanctuary. Visitors started coming by. Adoption coordinators, volunteers, even a couple who had seen the first clinic photo posted online and wanted to meet the miracle mama and her son. But every time, Ghost would press himself closer to her, and she'd lift her chin in that protective way, eyes narrowing just enough to send the message. Not yet. They still needed each other. Every day, I stayed with them. Even when I had work waiting, even when my phone wouldn't stop buzzing, I found myself sitting there, watching them nap together like it was church, quiet, sacred. Some part of me didn't want to disturb it. It was during one of those afternoons that I realized something. She wasn't just healing. She was teaching him to trust slowly, teaching me to sit still and notice, teaching all of us that you can be broken, used, discarded, and still rise up, limp and all, to protect what matters. And somehow, in the middle of all that, she was still giving more than she took. It happened on a Tuesday. The vet called me in early, before the center opened to the public. I thought something was wrong. My heart dropped the second I saw the text. But when I walked into the back room, I stopped cold. Halo was standing, not for seconds, not with help. She was standing, full weight on 3 legs, the injured one gently touching down now and then for balance. Her bandages were gone. The fresh scar down her leg looked angry, but clean. Her eyes found mine instantly, and this time, they didn't just watch me, they saw me. Ghost raced past my feet and launched himself into her chest with a little thump. She didn't even flinch, just bent her neck and pressed into him like gravity itself had finally come back. She walked out of her pen this morning, the vet whispered beside me, all by herself, no warning, just got up and came to the door. I didn't know what to say, so I just sat beside her on the floor, like I always had. She came to me this time, limped over those last few feet and rested her head in my lap, Ghost dancing circles around us both. I let my hand move over her fur, cleaner now, still a little coarse from the shave, but soft around the neck where the collar had once cut in. The scars were visible. They would always be. But she wasn't hiding them anymore. That afternoon, a couple came in again, the ones from earlier. They had 2 acres north of Austin, a fenced yard, no other pets. They'd waited, watched the updates, said they'd only take them if it could be both. Not just Ghost, not just Halo, both. We took them outside for the first time. The sun was hot on the concrete, and Halo blinked against the brightness. Ghost bounded ahead, ears too big for his head, tail swinging like a flag. She followed slowly, deliberately, the limp noticeable but not painful. When she reached the grass, she paused. Then she laid down and rolled, right there in the dirt, back and forth, legs in the air, eyes squinting with joy. Ghost jumped on her belly and licked her jaw, and she let him. No fear, no flinch, just warmth. The couple cried. The clinic staff cried. And I turned away for a second, pretending to check my phone, because something about that moment cracked me open in a way I wasn't ready for. She wasn't surviving anymore. She was living. That night, After the papers were signed and the crate was loaded into the back of their car, I knelt beside her one last time. Ghost had already curled into the blankets, tail thumping sleepily. I scratched behind her ear and said it again, soft as ever. "Halo." She looked at me, and then for the first and only time she licked my cheek. Not quick, not out of fear, just one slow, deliberate motion, like a goodbye. 2 weeks later, I got the photo. Halo on a porch swing, Ghost curled beside her, both of them bathed in that warm Texas evening light. Her fur had grown back clean and full. The red scars on her leg had faded into thin, pale lines. You could still see them if you looked close, but somehow they made her look stronger. Ghost had grown, fast. His paws were too big for his body now, ears still lopsided. In the photo, he's looking straight at the camera like he owns the world. I stared at that image for a long time. Not because I missed them, though I did, but because it felt impossible that just a few weeks earlier I'd found them bleeding and abandoned in a field, the world ready to forget them. And now, they looked like they'd always belonged there. The new owners, Michael and Anna, sent updates every couple days. Halo now had a padded bed in every room. Ghost had discovered tennis balls. They'd learned to move through the house as a unit, packed always side by side like they shared one heartbeat. He cries when she's out of sight, Anna wrote. She growls if someone knocks on the door while he's sleeping. I laughed reading that. Not because it was funny, but because that was Halo. Still watching, still guarding. I visited them once before their official adoption hold ended. Michael invited me out for dinner, said I should see how they were doing. I drove up to their place just outside Austin. Quiet land, wide sky, the kind of silence you don't get in the city. When I stepped out of the car, Ghost came sprinting across the yard, leash trailing behind him. He launched into my legs and rolled over, belly up, eyes shining, and behind him, she followed. Halo limped less now. But what struck me wasn't her movement. It was her presence. She looked taller, not in size, but in spirit, like she'd stepped out of survival and into something bigger. When she reached me, she sat, calm, watchful. I knelt. She leaned in. We stayed there like that, forehead to forehead, her breath warm, the wind rustling the oak trees overhead. Michael said later that she didn't do that with anyone else. They've started calling her the General around the neighborhood. Says she keeps the deer out of the garden and the delivery men at a respectful distance. Ghost follows her everywhere, tail always wagging, like she's the only map he'll ever need. They weren't supposed to make it. Not the way we found them, not with the injuries, the trauma, the fear, but somehow they rewrote the ending. Together. She never stopped watching him. Even in their new home, even months later, Halo still scanned the yard before Ghost stepped out. Still positioned herself between him and the gate. Still slept with one paw touching his back. It was instinct. It was love. It was proof that no amount of suffering could erase who she really was. Every time I think about that first moment, her body shaking, blood in her fur, yet still shielding that tiny German Shepherd puppy like her life meant nothing without his. I remember something the vet said later offhand, almost in disbelief. Some dogs don't just survive. They refuse to surrender. And that's what she did. She refused. Refused to die in that field, refused to let her son grow up afraid, refused to let cruelty be the last chapter in their story. People like to say rescue stories are about second chances. But Halo didn't wait for a second chance. She created one. With every breath, every growl, every shaky step, she bent the world back toward hope. That's what makes dogs like her different. They don't hate. They don't give up. They just love. Harder, louder, longer than seems possible. And sometimes, if we're lucky enough, we get to witness it. This little guy's journey from abandonment to rehabilitation shows how important nonprofit rescue groups really are. Caring for a rescued puppy is more than love. It's responsibility. It's pet care. It's waking up in the middle of the night because he had a bad dream, or sitting on the floor for hours because that's where he feels safe. People always ask me why I still do this, why I keep showing up, why I keep watching videos of cruelty, answering calls at 2 a.m., driving into fields not knowing what I'll find. It's because of her. Because one day, another dog will be out there, shaking, bleeding, still protecting, and if I don't go, who will? So if you felt something watching this, don't let it end here. Support your local shelters, volunteer, foster, adopt, Or at the very least, share this video, because stories like Halo's don't just move hearts, they save lives. Join our Brave Paws family. Be their voice, be their hope. They dumped him like trash outside the Veterans Hospital. No note, no collar, just a cardboard shoebox baking on the sidewalk, sagging from the weight of something barely alive. I saw it twitch out of the corner of my eye, a movement too slow to be wind, too fragile to ignore. I thought it was litter. Then I heard a sound so faint it barely existed. Not a bark, not a cry, just breath. He was a German Shepherd puppy, maybe 4 months old, maybe less. His black and tan fur was matted with dust and dried leaves. Ants crawled across his flank, his mouth hung open, tongue curled like leather, and his eyes, God, his eyes, were wide but hollow, like he'd stopped hoping anyone was coming. It was over 90 degrees in San Antonio that day. People walked past, some glanced, no one stopped. I wasn't supposed to either. I was just another guy heading into therapy, trying to forget the things I'd seen. But something about that box, about him, made everything else disappear. He didn't flinch when I leaned down, didn't lift his head, just blinked once, slow and resigned. "Hey," I whispered. "You hanging on, little guy?" His body was limp when I picked him up. He weighed almost nothing, just bone and air and heat. His back legs dangled wrong, stiff and useless. I felt panic rise in my throat. He didn't even whimper. I ran. Not walked. Ran inside the VA clinic like a madman, shouting for help with a puppy in my arms. Nurses rushed. A volunteer vet tech named Serena met us at the door, and the color drained from her face. "Oh no," she breathed. "He's crashing." They laid him on a towel, started fluids, pressed cool rags to his tiny frame. His gums were pale, his paws cracked and burned, like he'd walked too far on hot concrete before giving up. "No chip, no tag," someone said. "No one's coming." They asked if I'd stay, said he might not make it, and dogs shouldn't die alone. I sat, I didn't know why, I just did. And after a while, after the noise and motion slowed down, the little German Shepherd puppy moved, just barely. He shifted his head and pressed it weakly against my boot. That was it, the moment that broke me. Not when I found him, not when they saved him, but when he reached out. "What's his name?" Serena asked softly. I looked down at that fragile life, dirty, broken, abandoned, and felt something stir in my chest. "Zeke," I said. "His name is Zeke." And maybe, just maybe, mine was about to change too. He didn't stand the next day, or the next. Zeke just lay there, curled in a makeshift bed of towels inside the clinic's quiet room. His breathing had stabilized, but his legs wouldn't move. The German Shepherd puppy had no fight left in him. He didn't cry, didn't resist. He just watched me with those heavy, ancient eyes, like he was waiting for permission to let go. Serena checked his reflexes. "Still nothing in the hind legs," she said, her tone caught between clinical and heartbroken. "Might be nerve damage, malnutrition, or both. We won't know for days." I nodded like I understood, but I didn't. I'd seen soldiers immobilized in the field, heard the weight of silence after impact. But this was a puppy, just a puppy. I didn't go home that night. I sat beside him until they closed the clinic, and then again the next morning before they opened. I brought coffee. I brought a towel from my truck that still smelled like sun. On the third morning, Serena gave me a look. "You can't keep sitting here forever, you know." I just shrugged. "What if he wakes up alone?" She didn't argue, just handed me a small paper cup. "For you. He's not the only one who looks like he's been hit by a truck." I smiled, the first time in weeks. That afternoon, Zeke tried to lift his head. Just an inch, just for a second. It dropped again, but I saw it. So did Serena. "That's something," she whispered. "That's fight." Later that day, when I stepped away to take a call, I returned to find Zeke dragging himself, front legs working, back legs limp, inch by inch across the towel toward the spot where I'd been sitting. He collapsed there, chest heaving, eyes shut tight, and I just stood there, phone forgotten in my hand, throat burning. I sat down, and without hesitation, he rested his chin on my thigh. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay, Zeke." And then I did something I hadn't done in years. I cried. Not the quiet kind. Not the kind you wipe away quickly and hope no one sees. The ugly, aching, unraveling kind. The kind that comes from the middle of your chest, the part you don't let anyone touch. Because I saw it now. I saw myself in him. The way he was broken, but not gone. Hurt, but still trying. silent but screaming in every breath, "Don't leave me again." And I couldn't. I wouldn't. I didn't know what tomorrow held. The vets didn't promise anything. But I told Zeke that night, as he lay pressed against my leg, asleep for the first time without trembling, "You're not going back to a box, not ever again." The German Shepherd puppy didn't answer, but for the first time, his tail twitched. Once, maybe twice. And it felt like hope. Zeke peed on himself the next morning. He tried to move, but his legs just wouldn't work, and when the urine soaked the towel beneath him, he froze like he expected to be punished for it. I saw the fear in his face. Not shame. Fear. Like someone had already taught him what happened when you made a mess. I dropped to my knees beside him. "It's okay, buddy," I whispered, pulling the wet towel away and replacing it with a clean one. "No one's mad. You're safe now. I promise." He didn't look at me at first, just stared at the wall like he was trying to disappear into it. That broke something in me all over again. Serena came in with a new syringe of vitamins and quietly handed me a warm compress. "Keep talking to him," she said. "Even if he doesn't react, he's listening. Dogs remember tone more than words." So I did. I told Zeke about the dog I'd had as a kid, a big old shepherd named Duke who used to sleep outside my bedroom door. I told him about the Marines, about the day I came home and didn't recognize the sound of my own house anymore, about how quiet used to be my friend and then turned into something I couldn't stand. He didn't respond, not much. But when I talked about Duke, Zeke blinked slower, calmer. That was something. By the end of the week, he could sit up, wobbling, leaning against the wall, but upright. Serena called it a miracle. I called it Zeke. They said he'd need physical therapy if there was any hope for his back legs. Hydrotherapy, support harnesses, time. Maybe months, maybe more. I asked what happened if he didn't recover. Serena paused, then said, "Some people wouldn't take it on. They'd say it's too much." I looked down at the German Shepherd puppy now resting against my boot again, his breathing even, one paw twitching like it was trying to remember how to be strong. "Well," I said quietly, "I'm not some people." That night, when I got home, I cleared a space in the corner of my bedroom and set down a folded blanket. I stared at it a while, thought about the fact that I hadn't let anything or anyone share my space in years. Then I drove back to the clinic. Zeke came home with me. He didn't bark, didn't wag, just lay curled on the passenger seat like it was the first warmth he'd ever known. When we reached the door, I hesitated. My hand shook on the doorknob. For a moment, I was back there, in the dark, with memories I didn't invite, with ghosts I thought I'd locked outside. And then I looked down. Zeke was watching me. Still, waiting, not judging, just trusting me to go first. So I did, and together we walked in. The first night at home, Zeke didn't sleep. Neither did I. He lay on the blanket by my bed, curled so tight it was like he was trying to fold himself into something smaller, something invisible. Every hour or so, I'd hear the scrape of his front paws as he shifted, tried to move, then whimpered softly and gave up. He didn't cry out. Not loud. Just these tiny broken sounds, like apologies in the dark. Around 3 a.m., I got up, pulled my blanket off the bed, and lay down beside him on the floor. Just breathing with him, just letting him know I was there. When I opened my eyes at dawn, his head was resting on my shoulder. That morning, I carried him outside in my arms. His legs dangled, limp as always, but he didn't resist. He just sniffed the air, blinked at the sun, and leaned into me like I was his anchor. I set him gently on the grass in my backyard, a patchy little space half choked by weeds. He looked around, lifted his head high, and for the first time, his tail gave a single wag. That tiny motion nearly dropped me to my knees. Over the next few days, I made ramps out of plywood and cushions. I built a little support sling out of an old backpack strap and a towel. I Googled exercises for canine paralysis. Serena sent me links, tips, encouragement. She never said it outright, but I could hear it in her voice. Not many people went this far for dogs like Zeke. But Zeke wasn't just a dog anymore. He was my reason. Each morning, I lifted him into the harness and helped him take 3 steps. By the 3rd day, it became 5, then 7. On the 5th day, he dragged his back leg just an inch, but he moved it. Not me. I cheered like he'd won the Super Bowl. Zeke just looked up at me with his ears perked and eyes wide, like he wasn't sure what he did right, but he'd do it again if it made me smile. And then came the breakthrough. It was a Thursday. I remember because the air smelled like cut grass and I just refilled his water dish. I set him down for his usual assisted walk, but halfway through, he stopped. Then, slow and shaking, Zeke lifted one back leg and placed it down. Not a drag, a step. I froze. He looked at me as if asking, "Was that okay?" I dropped to the ground, wrapped my arms around him, and laughed, loud and messy and stunned. And that's when it happened. Zeke licked my face. Just once. Just enough. Like he was telling me, "I'm not giving up on you either." And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't dared admit. This little German Shepherd puppy, discarded, broken, half paralyzed, was healing me just as much as I was healing him. A week later, he stood on his own, just for a second, but it was enough to make me forget how to breathe. Zeke had been trying all morning, shifting his weight in the sling, wobbling on his front paws. His back legs kept collapsing beneath him like they didn't believe in themselves yet. But that day, something changed. He looked up at me. I swear he looked at me, like now and then, he pushed. His legs straightened, trembled, and held. I didn't even realize I was crying until I laughed and tasted salt. He stood there, proud and shaking, tail low but moving, and then he flopped over sideways into the grass like a dropped rag doll. But he stood. He stood. Serena cried when I sent her the video. "This German Shepherd puppy has more fight than most humans," she wrote back. "Don't let up. He's got something special in him." Yeah, he did, and I was starting to believe that maybe I did too. Every day after that, we walked, not far, not fast. I'd loop the sling under his belly, give him just enough support to try. He'd wobble, lean, stumble, growl in frustration, and then try again. He never gave up. Not once. Neither did I. There were still bad nights. Some loud noise would trigger him. Fireworks, sirens, slamming car doors. He'd flatten against the floor, eyes wide, breath fast, frozen like he was back in some silent kind of hell. And I'd lie beside him, hand on his back, whispering things I used to tell my squad mates during mortar fire. "You're okay. I got you. We're not alone anymore." I realized I wasn't just talking to him. At the VA, I stopped skipping appointments, started showing up early, brought photos of Zeke. The other vets began asking about him, the puppy who wouldn't walk, now taking steps. He became a quiet kind of legend around there. Some guys would linger after group just to ask if they could meet him. "You should certify him." One of them said, "He's already doing the job." I laughed at first. "He still pees on his feet." The guy shrugged. "So do some of us." But the idea stuck. I started researching therapy dog programs. The requirements were strict: obedience, calm under pressure, responsiveness, control. But Zeke had already learned the hardest lesson: how to survive what tried to break him. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed while he snored at my feet. I looked down at this German Shepherd puppy, this four-legged scrap of second chances, and whispered, "What do you think, Zeke? Want to save some lives?" He didn't wake up, but his tail wagged, once, slow and steady, and I took it as a yes. The day he walked across the clinic floor without the sling, everyone stopped what they were doing. It wasn't graceful, it wasn't fast, but Zeke's back legs held, wobbly, stubborn, determined. Step by crooked step, the little German Shepherd puppy crossed that tile floor like it was a battlefield he'd finally conquered. Serena covered her mouth with both hands. One of the techs actually clapped. Zeke looked confused by the attention. He paused halfway, ears perked, then did something none of us expected. He sat. Just like that. On his own. And I swear to God, he looked proud. I knelt down and opened my arms, and he limped the last 3 steps straight into my chest. Everyone went quiet. "Okay," Serena whispered. "Let's talk next steps." We started formal training the following week. The certification process was more intense than I thought. Not physically. Zeke was getting stronger by the day, but emotionally. They put him through scenarios meant to test stress responses: crowds, sudden noises, wheelchairs, crying children, even hospital smells. He passed the first 3 without blinking. The 4th, a sudden yell from behind a curtain made him drop. Not bolt, not bark, just drop. Flat to the ground, tail tucked. It was instant, a flash of old fear. I crouched next to him, whispered like I always did, "It's okay, I'm here. We're safe." He didn't move for a long minute. But then he lifted his head, scanned the room, and stood up. That's what made the trainers pause. Not the drop. The recovery. They marked it down. Resilience. Exceptional. At home, we practiced everything. I built obstacle courses in the hallway, played audio recordings of hospital beeps and chatter. I even borrowed my buddy's wheelchair to let Zeke learn to walk beside it. He never backed down, never once said no. Even on the days he limped so hard I had to carry him to bed, he'd wake up ready to try again. One night, after a longer session than usual, I lay on the floor next to him. He stretched out beside me, eyes half closed, breathing soft. "You know," I said quietly, "you don't have to be perfect, just present." Zeke shifted, pressed his nose to my shoulder, and in that moment I realized that's what he'd been giving me all along. Not perfection, not answers, just presence. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a man managing his damage. I felt like someone building something new. Because if this broken little German Shepherd puppy could find his legs again, maybe I could find my way back too. The first time Zeke visited the VA hospital with me, I was more nervous than he was. He sat beside me in the passenger seat, harness snug, eyes alert, tail tapping every few seconds against the console like a metronome of quiet confidence. Meanwhile, my palms were sweating, my throat dry. I hadn't walked through those hospital doors without a breakdown in years. Zeke didn't know that, but maybe he did. As we pulled into the parking lot, I glanced over at him. The German Shepherd puppy looked up, tilted his head just slightly like he was checking me. "You're the therapy dog, huh?" I muttered with a shaky laugh. "Well, guess what, hero? We're both gonna need therapy after this." He blinked slowly. No judgment, just presence. Walking through those front doors again was like stepping into a memory I'd worked hard to forget. The hallway smelled the same, that faint mix of antiseptic, coffee, and something I could never name, something sterile and sad. Zeke walked beside me without a leash, close enough that his shoulder brushed my leg. Heads turned as we passed. A few vets nodded, some smiled. One man in a wheelchair actually whispered, "That the one from the story?" Serena had apparently been talking. We reached the rehab wing. A group therapy session was ending. I hovered by the door, unsure, and that's when a young guy, early 20s maybe, sat frozen in his chair, fists clenched, jaw locked. His therapist stood beside him, whispering something I couldn't hear. I don't know what made Zeke move. No command, no cue. But he stepped forward, slow and sure, and sat right in front of the kid. Didn't nudge him, didn't bark, just sat and waited. The room was quiet. Then the kid, shaking, eyes red, reached out and touched Zeke's ear. That was it. Zeke didn't move, just let it happen. The kid broke into tears, shoulders shaking. His therapist knelt beside him, nodding, grounding him. I stood in the doorway, breath held, heart in my throat. That was the first time I saw it. Not hope, not magic. Purpose. Zeke wasn't just surviving anymore, he was working. That night, I took him for a walk in the quiet, empty streets behind my building. The sun was setting, that golden kind of light that makes everything look softer than it really is. Zeke walked strong, confident, legs still stiff, sure, but his. Every step his own. We stopped near the end of the block. He sat, looked up at me. "You know," I said, scratching behind his ear, "I used to think I'd never matter to anyone again." Zeke leaned into my hand. "But you," I swallowed. "You're proof that I was wrong." The German Shepherd puppy didn't answer. But in that stillness, in that shared silence, I felt something settle inside me, something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. We were invited to our first official therapy session the following week, a support group for veterans newly diagnosed with PTSD. Most of them were still raw, fresh out of active duty, barely sleeping, barely talking. I knew the look in their eyes because I used to see it in the mirror. Zeke trotted beside me down the hospital corridor like he belonged there. Tail low, ears forward, pace steady. No leash. He didn't need one. That German Shepherd puppy had become more in tune with my energy than most people ever were. We entered the room and the chatter stopped. 8 men and women sat in a rough circle. Some stared. One guy flinched. Another crossed his arms and turned away. The facilitator, a soft-spoken Navy vet named Reggie, gave me a small nod. "Everyone, this is Tom, and this is Zeke." Zeke stepped forward first, as if he knew it was his cue. He didn't rush. He didn't make eye contact. He just moved quietly, slowly, giving space, letting them come to him. One woman blinked hard and whispered, "He's beautiful." Zeke sat near her, not too close, just enough to be seen. His presence filled the room like warmth, and one by one they began to shift. A man with tremors extended a tentative hand. Zeke didn't move, just waited until the fingers brushed his fur. then leaned gently into the touch. Another guy, shoulders tight like coiled wire, exhaled for what felt like the first time all session. No tricks, no barking, no forced affection, just quiet connection. That's when I realized Zeke didn't fix people. He reminded them they weren't broken alone. Afterward, Reggie pulled me aside. "You ever think about speaking, Tom?" I shook my head. "Zeke's the one doing the work." He smiled. "Maybe, but you carry it too, and these guys, they need someone who gets it." I didn't answer, because the truth was, I wasn't sure I did get it. How a half-paralyzed German Shepherd puppy abandoned in a cardboard box under the Texas sun could become a lifeline for people barely holding on. And yet, there he was, day after day, session after session, healing by simply being. One evening, after a long group session, I sat with Zeke on the hood of my truck under the stars. He rested his head on my leg, eyes half closed, tail twitching softly. "You do good work, buddy," I whispered. He didn't move, just stayed still. Present. Real. And I remembered the way he dragged himself across that clinic towel, legs useless, body shaking, just to be near me. He never asked for anything, never complained, just gave what he had every single time. That night, I fell asleep on the couch with Zeke curled against my chest, and for the first time since I came home, I didn't dream of war. The request came unexpectedly, an invitation to speak at the annual Veterans Mental Health Awareness Day. They wanted Zeke to attend, of course. Everyone did. But they also wanted me to share our story, to stand on a stage in front of hundreds of people, politicians, doctors, soldiers, and talk about trauma, healing, and a German Shepherd puppy who changed everything. I almost said no. I stared at the email for hours, hand hovering over the keyboard, chest tight. The thought of going back into that place, the spotlight, the vulnerability, made my hands shake. But Zeke had never hesitated. Not once. Not when his body gave up on him. Not when strangers reached for him with trembling fingers. Not when the world had left him behind in a box. He just kept showing up. And if he could do that, so could I. So I said yes. The night before the event, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept cycling through all the worst-case scenarios, stumbling over my words, freezing mid-sentence, breaking down in front of a crowd. I paced the living room until well after midnight. Zeke followed me, quiet and steady, never more than a few feet away. At one point, I stopped and looked down at him. "You're not worried, huh?" I whispered. He blinked, then without a sound, walked over and rested his head against my leg, as if to say, "You've done harder things." The next morning, we walked into the auditorium together. Zeke wore his vest, navy blue with a patch that read "Therapy Dog," working. He held his head high, his gait was strong now, confident, his tail didn't drag anymore. The coordinator guided us backstage. I peeked out through the curtain, rows and rows of faces, cameras, lights. I started to sweat. Then I felt it, warm pressure against my calf. Zeke had leaned into me, just a little, but it was enough. They called our names. I walked to the podium. My boots echoed too loudly in the silence. I stood there, heart pounding, throat dry, 1,000 words jammed in my mouth, and then Zeke padded forward, turned in a slow circle, and lay down at my feet, calm, composed, solid. The audience softened. The tension broke. I took a breath and spoke. I told them about a cardboard box, about broken legs and silent nights, about how this little German Shepherd puppy, discarded by the world, gave me back a piece of myself I thought was gone for good. I didn't cry, not until the very end, and even then, it wasn't grief. It was gratitude. When I stepped off the stage, people lined up to meet him. Vets, spouses, young men who said nothing but dropped to their knees to press their foreheads to his. Zeke took it all in. No barking, no flinching, just stillness and warmth. That night, as I unclipped his vest and set it gently on the hook by the door, I realized something. He didn't need to be a hero. He already was. The call came late one afternoon, just as I was lacing up my boots. A vet named Chris, someone I'd seen around group a few times but never heard speak, had locked himself in his apartment, wouldn't answer his phone, wouldn't come to the door. His brother was panicking. "Can you bring the dog?" the social worker asked. "We don't know what else to try." I didn't ask questions, just said, "We're on our way." Zeke jumped into the truck without hesitation. He always seemed to know when it was serious. No barking, no tail wag, just focus. This German Shepherd puppy, once discarded like garbage, now moving with the calm intention of someone who understood pain, because he'd lived it. When we arrived, the complex was quiet. A few neighbors stood back, watching from porches, eyes wide. A police cruiser sat idle at the curb, lights off, no sirens. The building manager let us in. The door to apartment 3B was closed, locked from the inside. We could hear music playing. Low, repetitive. The kind of sound that wraps around your ribs and doesn't let go. The social worker stood outside the door, eyes red. He won't speak to anyone. Just keep saying he's not worth fixing. I looked down at Zeke. He was already sitting, staring at that door like he knew someone was bleeding on the other side. "Let me try," I said. They hesitated, but stepped back. I knocked once. "Chris," I said, keeping my voice low. "It's Tom. I brought someone who wants to see you." No answer. "I'm not here to fix you," I continued. "Neither is he. We don't want you to be alone tonight." A long pause. Then, a faint click. The door cracked open 2 inches. That's all Zeke needed. He pushed his nose through the gap, tail still, ears forward, and waited. No barking, no pushing, just being. Another pause, then the door opened wider. Chris was on the floor, back against the far wall, eyes hollow, shoulders trembling. A picture frame lay shattered beside him. Zeke didn't rush. He walked slowly, one step at a time until he reached him, then lay down with a sigh, just inches away, and didn't move. Chris didn't either, not for a long time. Then, as quiet as breath, he reached out, just one hand. Zeke met him halfway. That was all it took. Tears came next. Shoulders shaking, hands in fur, the kind of sobbing that rips through years of silence. I sat across the room, watching. Didn't speak. Didn't need to. Because in that moment, Zeke was doing what no human could. He wasn't offering solutions. He was offering presence. And that was enough. Later, as the crisis team arrived and Chris nodded, silent but calm, I clipped Zeke's vest back into place and led him outside. The sun had dipped low, painting the sky in soft orange. I looked down at the German Shepherd puppy walking beside me, his steps even, steady. And I realized he hadn't just survived his pain. He had transformed it into healing. For me, for them, for anyone willing to sit beside the broken and stay a while. The day Zeke received his certification, I didn't expect to cry. I told myself it was just a formality, a piece of paper, a patch on his vest, a checklist. But when they called his name, when the coordinator handed me the certificate with Zeke, certified therapy dog, printed in bold at the top, my hands shook. He sat beside me, calm and steady, like he had no idea what it meant. Like he didn't understand he'd just been officially recognized for what he'd already been since the day he pressed his fragile body against my boot on that clinic floor. A healer. The applause in that room wasn't just for him. It was for everything he'd endured, everything he'd overcome, and every silent, broken soul he'd helped along the way, including mine. After the ceremony, we took a walk through the VA gardens. It was quiet, warm, the kind of day that made you feel like the world had space again. Zeke walked without assistance now. His gait still had a wobble, but it was his. He owned it. And somehow it made him look prouder, not weaker. Like every step was a declaration. I'm still here. We passed a bench beneath a jacaranda tree, the blossoms falling like soft purple rain. Zeke paused, nose twitching in the breeze. I sat down, he rested his head on my lap, and I let myself think about the box again, that first moment. Hot sun, dry fur, ribs too visible, breath so faint it barely moved the air. I'd found him in pieces, but the truth? He found me the same way. I hadn't realized how far I'd fallen. Not until this little German Shepherd puppy began piecing me back together without saying a single word. And now people looked at him and saw hope, calm, trust. What they didn't know was that behind every soft blink and gentle touch was fire. This dog had fought for every breath, every step, every single heartbeat. And in doing that, he taught me how to fight too. Not with fists, but with presence, with patience, with love that asked for nothing in return. As we sat under that tree, I ran my hand down his back and whispered, "We did it, Zeke." He looked up at me, not with excitement or pride, but something deeper, something steady, something unshakable, like he already knew. Sometimes healing doesn't look like a miracle. Sometimes it looks like a trembling step, a soft blink in a crowded room, a German Shepherd puppy pressing his head into your chest when you don't have the words to say you're not okay. Zeke was never supposed to survive. He was thrown away, forgotten, paralyzed. A tiny heartbeat left in a box outside a hospital. But this little guy's journey from abandonment to rehabilitation shows how important nonprofit rescue groups really are. because what they saved wasn't just a dog. They saved a lifeline. Zeke now works full-time as a certified therapy dog, serving veterans in crisis, visiting hospitals, and sitting quietly beside men who once believed they'd never smile again. He doesn't ask questions. He doesn't offer advice. He simply stays. And sometimes that's enough to save a life. Caring for a rescued puppy is more than love. It's responsibility. It's pet care. It's knowing that even the smallest, most broken creature can carry something the rest of us forgot how to hold: hope. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, and share. Every time this video is shared, more people understand what rescue really means, and more dogs like Zeke get their second chance. Join our Brave Paws family. Be their voice. Be their hope.